Good evening. It is a great pleasure that you can come with us to our webinar on opportunities of decarbonization of the waterway transportation in the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. We would like to have a conversation about the institutional framework about the waterway, exchange opinions, points of view on the analysis of replacement and substitution of fuels that we work together with OLADE. The study will be downloaded from the web through the link or the QR code together with the invitation. We would like to thank the Executive Secretariat of the Government Committee of the Waterway for collaborating in this work. I would like to mention that today we will have the first session and on Thursday the second session at this time. We would like to invite the audience to send your comments and questions that you'll be able to do on the chat box of your screens. Without further ado, we would like to welcome the opening remarks in this order. Romina Bocache, Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Committee of the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway, Florencia Tadeo Mohert, representative of the IDB in Paraguay, and Alfonso Blanco, Executive Secretary of the Latin American Organization of Energy. Romina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto. I would like to also thank you and welcome you to such an important event. I would like to thank institutions together with the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway Intergovernmental Committee for making this event possible, the IDB and OLADE, the Latin American Energy Organization, and also my greetings to my panelists, Eugenia and Alfonso. I would like to tell you that for the Waterway Intergovernmental Committee, this is a very important event because it has given us the opportunity to get together with different private and public players of the 5 countries that make up the Waterway Committee to exchange ideas and visions on a strategic topic such as clean energy and clean fuels in the waterways with multiple impacts and consequences, as we will see throughout the workshop. And it also helps us to spread our work, as we have been doing in our committee, through a group of experts created for this specific topic. And then later on, I will be able to talk about it further. We have huge expectations, and we hope that it will help to advance forward in the use of clean energies and alternative fuels in the waterway. Thank you very much for being with me today. And now we will continue with Eugenia. Thank you, Romina. Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Alfonso. It is a pleasure for me to be a part of this, to initiate this dialogue on such an important topic for the region, such as the transition to decarbonization. I thank you to the Executive Committee for the Waterway for having the opportunity to work together with OLADE. I thank you also. I thank OLADE for the cooperation that we are driving forward. The technical teams are also important because through the technical report, this is our first approach to the transition to cleaner fuels in river transportation. At the bank, we have a very clear idea of what this means in the strategic importance, the logistics and trade for the countries that make up this committee: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. That is why we are so much interested in taking advantage of this opportunity to think and to reflect together and to contribute to the economic growth of the countries. We believe that this transition to cleaner energies in the waterway is an extremely important topic in our current context with this unprecedented pandemic that has a serious impact on the economies of our countries and that it makes our objectives more difficult in productivity and to make sure that we have an environment with less contamination. It is a pleasure to be able to cooperate with different countries in their efforts in the three windows that we have. It is a thing that is related to the private and the public sector issues and the innovation labs. We have two very important sessions, and of course, I invite you to accompany us, that you can share your views and ideas so that decarbonization of the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway becomes a future reality. Thank you very much, and I pass on the word to my Alfonso.
Thank you very much, Florencia. This is for us a great pleasure to be with you in this initiative. I would really like to give a special thanks to the Intergovernmental Committee on the Waterway for allowing this event, for making it possible, and also thank you to the IDB for making this collaborative work. We are very pleased with the results in this first approach to a study to try to address the issue of decarbonization in the waterway transportation. Much has been spoken about the energy transitions in relation to the decarbonization at transportation level, but very much focused on individual transport, on public mobility, but little has been said in the region about improving the use of the resources of our region in the waterway transportation. So what we are trying to promote in a coordinated manner among organizations is to more or less generate and show the generation of synergies. What we are showing is how to address a sector of high energy consumption as is transportation, which is of vital importance for the economic development of our region. On the other hand, at OLADE, we have a very clear intention that this type of work that we are carrying out in a collaborative manner between the Intergovernmental Committee of Waterway and OLADE, we know that this work can become into something innovative in our region, a leading work in our region that can be replicated in many regions and many countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. So from OLADE, we have high hopes with this activity, and we invite you to share two sessions that will be very rich in technical content for these 2 days. And we have high expectations of what all these things will generate for the future. So once again, I would like to thank the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Commission on the Waterway, the IDB representative in Paraguay. And so from OLADE, I would like to welcome this type of instance that not only promotes the synergies among organizations, but also helps us work on innovative aspects. Thank you very much, and I wish you all excellent sessions in this exchange and dialogue.
Thank you, Romina, Florencia, Alfonso, for your aperture and welcome messages. Now we will start with our session. We will thank the representatives of the members of the Intergovernmental Waterways Committee that will give us their opinions on this topic. Good day, Argentina, Gabriel Martinez, Energy Secretariat. Darío, please go ahead. Thank you. Good day. I would like to thank the Waterway Intergovernmental Committee and, of course, Romina and Mariano. It is a pleasure to interact in this way because the pandemia has familiarized us with the use of these new technologies. Argentina is an important producer of energy. We are focused in the launching of a plan of stimulus to have more biogas and have more accident in production. We will now have a new legislation on investment promotion. We are betting on the promotion issue, but as producers, we want to achieve better articulation and coordination of policies and common strategies throughout the region. And that is why these committees are so important for the Energy Secretariat and the government, the national government, even more so when there's the idea to work on new horizons, such as the one you are setting forward together with the naval industry, the shipping industry, universities, in order to develop and use LNG. And to tell you the truth, we are willing to help take care of the environment. We believe that this is a very good decision. It is a project where our secretariat will work very hard on so that in the intermediate and long term we can achieve positive results for the region. The energy policy should always be of intermediate and long term. We need to seek positive results, and our current situations shouldn't make us make decisions that go against our final goals. And this is why we wanted to participate and together with our tools be able to promote the development of this new possibility to increase energy production and have a better use, a more rational use of energy, thinking about the environment, of course, and that is why we are so happy to be a part of this panel.
Thank you, Secretary Martinez for Bolivia. Now we would like to invite Germán Alfredo Silva Yáñez, responsible person for the national and international policy of the General Office of Maritime, Waterway, and Marine Interests of the Ministry of Defense. Mr. Yáñez, you have the floor. Thank you. I would like, first of all, to send my greetings to all of the waterway members in the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway. As the representative of Argentina said, this year we've had crises and problems in many aspects, particularly in the location of our three international ports, Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. There has been a considerable reduction and decline of the dredging. And so, as you said before, I am an official of the Maritime Office in Bolivia, which is the National Office of Maritime sector. So what we could do in order to move forward in this aspect has to do with the regulatory framework. In 2017, the regulation on general transportation was approved, and this is related to the main four modalities of transport. In the water transportation, we were able to approve a series of administrative solutions in order to develop and expand the waterway activities, which is very important for us in Bolivia. The waterway is of paramount importance. We have a sovereign exit through this waterway. We've also worked in order to categorize the ports, the three main ports in the channel, and we've opened not long ago a state port in Port Buzo so as not to stop all the operations. We are working as well in everything that has to do with the merchant marine and also in relation to the possible short-term change for natural gas. We've conducted some studies, not studies, but prior analysis here at the office, always trying to see how we could reduce operating costs at the waterway and get better situations or status for the environment. Therefore, this meeting and this project that has been launched through OLADE is very important for us. We have a possibility here to change and improve waterway transportation. So I would like to thank you once again. And on my part, we've always been participating in the technical meetings of the Commission of the Agreement. Much progress has been made. Unfortunately, this year we had planned with Brazil to conduct a complete study of the entire channel, of the entire system in order to improve navigation in the area. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that was not possible to complete. And I hope that this work can be completed next year. I hope next year we have the possibility to do it. Thank you very much once again, and I am at your disposal.
Muchas gracias, señor Silva Yáñez. Por Brasil invitamos a Patricia Gravina, gerente de regulación de la navegación interior de la Agencia Nacional de Transportes Acuáticos. Adelante, señora Gravina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank, on behalf of the Brazilian government, the invitation and to congratulate you on this event and this initiative. It's a great pleasure for me to contribute in this context and to start the debate on the development of the waterway. As regards climate change, this is a problem that impacts our generation. That's something that we could say. We don't talk only about future. Today, we live the effects of the emissions of the greenhouse effect gases. And this is as if the science fiction films are already taking place. We are already living those effects. Well, of course, this has been on the debate for so many years. The thing is how to work with the alternative fuels, which are gaining strength, and they are changing some international regulatory framework, especially in the transport modals. We had a recent change in the maritime transportation rules. This caused a great debate because this is a very close horizon. We need to have a very important change in the maritime vessels pollutant emissions. And there are other programs and initiatives in the world, in the European Union, for example, among others. It's been a long time since they have been debating on this. And these vessels include technologies to pollute less, and they are starting to enter the market. And now, in a waterway in Paraná, Paraguay, that's very important to us because we see this as a way without return. We need to study, we need to discuss. This is not something simple, this is very complex. In spite of the external facts and the positive facts that we see and all the environmental benefits that we have, undoubtedly, with the constitution of these alternative fuels, which pollute less. This is something that involves a very important impact in these countries. The Paraná-Paraguay Waterway is extremely important for Brazil, not only for Brazil, but also for all the countries that use this waterway. It is fundamental for the economies of these countries, and so we need to work this in a coordinated way because it has not been debated enough. We need to improve the space with this waterway committee. And we need to see what we need, for example, what we need to bring to our debate. We need to, for example, consider the different parts that will be affected, the shipyards or shippers, because the result of this job, of this effort, has to be positive for everybody, because it will bring development for all the countries. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. This is the most important thing. We want to bring a democratic debate. It's not easy to evaluate the situation, and I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I wish you an excellent webinar. The agenda is wonderful, so I'm sure that these will be high-level discussions, and I'm at your disposal. Thank you very much.
In Paraguay, Vice Minister.
Viceministro de Relaciones Económicas e Integración. Adelante, viceministro, por favor.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this important workshop. I would like to congratulate this initiative to the Executive Secretariat of the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway Commission, the Latin American Secretariat of Energy, OLADE, and the Inter-American Development Bank for promoting this area for conversation, for discussion, for reflection upon these topics. And I believe that in this way, we are developing links in a strategic situation in order to strengthen the waterway. We, as a developing country, we consider the waterway first and foremost as a whole, not just as a navigable way, but also as an instrument for regional integration. And we know that this tool will allow us to be more competitive in the international trade. And so all those aspects are within the framework of the integration of our countries, of our economies, and our societies. Therefore, I believe that under this vision, the improvement of the navigation conditions is always a commitment and a priority of our states. In this line, it is very important to work together to identify areas of common interest, to carry out studies, projects, and programs, and works that will allow this target, this objective, to have navigation conditions 365 days of the year, 24 hours every day. In this manner, we highly welcome this initiative on the part of the Executive Secretariat, the Intergovernmental Committee, and we also assume the obligation to encourage discussions as far as the competencies of the agreement, the Commission, which is the technical body of our system. Therefore, developing these matters and topics makes it for the functioning of the convoys, the openings, the authorizations and permits of vessels, of crew, the operations of flag aspects. the training of staff and personnel, and a series of elements and actions that we understand are part of the regulatory framework of the waterway of the Santa Cruz de la Sierra Agreement, with the 8 additional protocols, the 14 rules, that we think uh, that there was such a close relationship. And with technology, we know now that the spectrum that involves this all calls for our action, calls for these disciplines to be in order in the waterway. Therefore, in this view, including new elements of joint work, of harmonization, of systematization, I believe that the main topic of this workshop, the opportunities for decarbonization, is a central element, because we usually say that waterway transportation is 20 times less expensive than ground transportation. And in the same manner, the proportion of friendliness, easiness, eco-friendliness of the waterway transport is a possibility. So within this framework, the possibility of proposing alternative fuels, other fuels meeting our local requirements and capabilities, biodiesel, ethanol, gas, and others, may be very positive elements that, in addition to benefiting the operating conditions of the waterway transportation, can also generate other economic opportunities for the region, the creation of jobs, and above all, the closeness to the environment. Therefore, in this framework, there will be an interesting chain of actions that will be interesting: how to capitalize investment and the carbon capture that will be very important to consider. So we are a region with a huge potential in the hydroelectrical sector. In the case of Paraguay, the country has 2 main binational centrals with Brazil and Argentina. So moving from fossil fuels to electrical systems, making those shifts will be very important, and we are not so far away from that installed capacity. Therefore, the main topic of this seminar is motivating us, is calling us into action, is very timely, and this is why, once again, we would like to uh, welcome this timely initiative. Paraguay, as a secretariat of the agreement, will seek to follow the steps of getting closer to the academia, of attracting researchers, attracting companies in this type of exchange, in order to optimize these natural resources as much as possible that are at the disposal of our countries, as is particularly the waterway transportation within the framework of the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway. Thank you very much for your invitation, and I would like to hope that the exchange of these results are very positive, and new ideas for development and discussion of other topics will come about. Thank you very much, and have a great workshop.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you very
viceministro
much,
Olmedo
Vice
Adorno.
Minister Olmedo
Por Uruguay
Adorno. Now
invitamos a Wilson
representing
Sierra, gerente
Uruguay,
de energías
Mr.
renovables del
Sierra,
Ministerio de
Ministry
Industria,
of Industry,
Energía y
Energy and
Tecnología.
Mining, Renewables Energy Manager. Hello, thank you from Uruguay for inviting us to take part in this initiative of the Intergovernmental Waterway Committee. Also thanking OLADE and the IDB. I believe that this is a very timely workshop. Of course, for a country such as ours, a small country, this means a lot. Integration means a lot. It's a key element. We've been working on this for several decades. This is a state policy for us. We have been constantly supporting and promoting integration in our different administrations. And of course, the waterway plays a key role as a regional integration instrument, an instrument that enables trading in the region. Of course, it is imperative to have sustainability, and in our country, we have a long tradition in the search for sustainability, and we have tried to represent this in our country logo, which is Natural Uruguay. This is an image that presents us before the world by reflecting this attempt to attain sustainability. I work at the Energy Ministry, and just to be able to tell you a little bit about our experience recently, and this, of course, positions us to be able to advance forward in the region. In this sense, I should mention that in Uruguay, in our recent years, we have undergone an energetic revolution, a deep transformation. When you think about energy, you need to think about the medium and long term, and of course, at the same time, we should also assess the different energetic dimensions beyond the technical and economical dimensions, which usually dominate the scene. We need to consider geopolitical, social, environmental aspects, and of course, I repeat, social aspects, of course, also social and cultural aspects. In this sense, after our attaining this energy and energetic policy, together with the agreement of all the interested parties in our government, we have now a big proportion that is based on renewable energy sources, not just energy related, but the main fuel in our country is biomass, a renewable source. As of 2016, petroleum oil is the second source at a national level. And of course, the destination of oil, petroleum, is for transportation. Two-thirds is for internal use. And this is our new endeavor. We have started developing this at a national level. Our main challenge before us for the short term is to advance in decarbonization of end uses in transportation and other uses at industrial level. And that is why this initiative is so well received by us. We are working on this, as I mentioned, because it clearly presents the fact that the development of alternative sources and native fuels, such as biofuels or maybe paper, which is related to green hydrogen, especially in the waterway. Well, these are issues where we believe we match the regional agenda driven forward by the Intergovernmental Committee and our national agenda. In Uruguay, we are committed to supporting this initiative. This is the kickstart of a longer project. And of course, I repeat, we are fully committed to driving it forward. We thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you today, and I wish you have a very fruitful workshop.
Thank you very much, our distinguished representatives from the countries, for sharing your views on this important topic. And now we are going to give the floor to Romina Bocache, who's going to present the institutional aspects of the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. Thank you very much, Roberto. I am going to start by showing you the map of the waterway that starts from Puerto Cáceres from Brazil, Nueva Palmira in Uruguay, 3,442 kilometers, and I included some figures here for you to have an idea of the geopolitical and geostrategic importance of the waterway, with 110 port facilities, an area of 720,000 square kilometers, an area of influence of 3 million square kilometers, and a population of around 60 million inhabitants. The political body, as I'm going to show you in the next slide, of the waterway is the Intergovernmental Committee, or CIH. So this is an instance, a forum of discussion and coordination of the 5 states. They have a shared view of the waterway as a strategic project for the development of the region. Ever since it was created and implemented 30 years ago, we can say that all the developments around the waterway make up a state policy at regional level. Basically, the CIH has a series of functions and roles that provide for a better navigability of this great waterway. It also provides for harmonization among the regulations and rules. It also formulates regulations for the operation of the waterway, and decisions are made by unanimous consent and consensus of the 5 member states. There are several pillars of work that have been prioritized by the CIH, for instance, developing regional statistics or coordination of infrastructure, thinking of the waterway as an nodal axis, the regulatory framework for an efficient operation of the waterway, and a main topic that has to do with an environmentally sustainable management of the waterway. The Commission of the Agreement has already started this work, and they worked to adjust international regulations to the waterway. For instance, the covenants on the prevention of contamination by vessels and ships. And another topic that will be the focus of our discussion, which is the possibility of using alternative fuels and clean energies in the waterway. This would have very important effects and impacts, such as mitigating the effects of climate change, benefiting health, because as you may imagine, the presence of contaminating substances in the air are harmful for human health. We will also see an impact on the operating costs and also on the competitiveness. You must imagine that the waterway is a huge water highway that is used to export products into the world. In general, we are price-taking regions, so we need to get to those markets with competitive prices. Therefore, logistics is key. And also, in order to use alternative fuels, it is necessary to adapt and adjust and make new vessels and ships. And this will have an impact on the development of the regional naval industry. The naval industry is a mother industry for job creation. So as you can see, we have many positive implications. But the main message that was also mentioned by the previous speakers has to do with the importance that the five states can coordinate joint policies and strategies in order to coordinate this matter, dialogue with the stakeholders. This is what this workshop shows. And this regional approach is very important. It adds value to the policies of the countries individually because it also offers foresight to the energy policies. So there may be shared views, and I think that here there is a common goal for all, the objective of using an ever safer, ever competitive, and ever sustainable, more sustainable waterway. I thank once again for this opportunity, and we will keep on with this
Muchas gracias, Romina,
workshop.
por tu
Thank you,
presentación.
Romina, for your presentation. A very clear presentation. Thank you.
Bueno, ahora me gustaría pasar a la
Okay,
discusión sobre el
now
análisis
I
de
would like to
sustitución de
go to
combustibles
the
que trabajamos con
discussion on the
OLADE.
analysis
Para ello nos
of fuel
acompaña Jorge Chicharelli,
substitution or
consultor
replacement. We have
especialista con una
Jorge
larga trayectoria en el
Citarelli,
sector,
special
Gordon Wilson,
consultant
profesor
with
de la
vast
Universidad de los Andes,
experience,
y
Gordon
Tatiana
Wayman
Castillo,
from
asesora
the
legal de OLADE.
university,
Bienvenida, bienvenidas.
and also the
¿Cuál fue la
representative from
motivación?
OLADE. Welcome.
¿Qué
What
combustibles
was
vamos a
the
usar para el
motivation
transporte
for this?
terrestre más
We have
eficiente,
studied
más
options
sostenible?
for
Por
more efficient,
ejemplo, a
sustainable
través de la
land
movilidad
transport
eléctrica que muchos países están
through
promoviendo,
uh,
con oportunos
electrical
propulsivos y en
mobility.
el caso del
Well, at
transporte de
OLADE, we
fluvial.
decided to
El río
analyze
Paraguay-Paraná
river
es sin duda el
transport.
principal corredor
And of course,
fluvial de
the
la región, con más de
Paraná-Paraguay Waterway is the
3.400
main river
kilómetros de
corridor
longitud,
with
pasa por 5
over
países.
uh,
Los volúmenes crecen
3,400
en medio
square
de una manera
kilometers,
muy
and
significativa en la
we
última
have
década.
a
Por ende, es un foco
significant
de alto
use and
consumo
advancement in the
energético.
last decade. So
En
it
ese
has
contexto,
high
Gordon,
energy
¿podrías
consumption.
por favor
So,
compartir
Gordon,
con la
could you
audiencia
please
cuáles son las
share
dimensiones y
with the
alternativas que
audience
tuvimos
what
en
are the different
cuenta en el
dimensions and
estudio?
alternatives that we
Bueno,
considered
muchas
for
gracias.
this
Sí,
study?
como tú bien dices,
Thank
hay una
you.
gran demanda de
As you
tecnologías
well
más
said,
sostenibles
there is a
en el
big
transporte
demand
acuático y
for
también
more
en el
sustainable
transporte
energy
fluvial y
sources
sobre todo
in the
marítimo.
water
Y eso no solo es
transport,
un tema de
especially now the
consumo de
river
las empresas de
transport, not just
transporte,
end
los
users,
constructores
but also
navales, las
from
grúas,
transportation
porque ya quieren
companies,
asumir esa
shipbuilders,
responsabilidad
ship
en el desarrollo
owners.
sostenible y al mismo
So
tiempo
we
sigo siendo
need this
competitivos.
because this is very
Y
useful
motivado
to
por esta
become and
creciente
continue being
presión hacia
competitive.
una
So
movilidad
we have
verde,
increasing
¿no? Es
pressure
decir, una búsqueda
towards a
que
green
explora
mobility.
los actuales
So we needed
posibilidades
to
técnicas y
explore with the
perspectivas
study
futuras
the
de los
technical
diferentes,
possibilities and
digamos,
future
los diferentes
perspectives of
combustibles
the
alternativos.
different or some
En
alternative
primer lugar, es importante reconocer que
fuel.
existen
So
estas diferentes y numerosas
we need
formas y
to
dimensiones del
acknowledge
transporte
that there
fluvial,
are
como tú
different
bien dices,
dimensions
tanto en la hidrovía
in river
Paraguay-Paraná
transport,
como la
both
avenida
in the
Transporte
Paraná-Paraguay
Fluvial. Y
waterway
estas formas
and
de
in the
transporte
other
fluvial
two
incluyen
river
tanto las
basins. And
embarcaciones más
these
grandes como los
modalities
convoyes,
include
pero también
big
las
ships,
canoas más
convoys,
pequeñas,
but
no incluyen
also
las
smaller
empresas de
canoes,
transporte de carga
and
pasajero y estos
also
servicios
cargo
donde tenemos una
transport,
combinación de
and
los dos.
also a combination
Y
of
también debemos
cargoes and
reconocer que
passenger
tenemos estos
transport. And we
alcances
need to
locales de corta
also
distancia
acknowledge
hasta
that we
alcances
have
internacionales
short
con diferentes
distance
alcances.
scope and
Frente a esta
long
presión de
distance
transformar nuestro
international
sistema de
scope.
transporte
And we need to
hacia servicios
transfer our
sostenibles, es importante
transport
buscar cómo
system
este match
with
correcto entre las
sustainability, and we
características de
need
estos
to
diferentes
find the
servicios
best
y la
match
gama de
amongst the
combustibles
characteristic of
existentes.
different services and the
Y así,
different
con esta gama
ranges
que
of
tenemos
fuels
disponible,
available. So
me gustaría
this
muy
range of
breve
fuels
referirme a
available to
dos.
us, well, I
En
would
la
like to
opción
refer
de
specifically
battery
to two:
electric, entonces de la movilidad
the
eléctrica
battery
y del
electric
hidrógeno.
fuels
Estas dos
and
alternativas
hydrogen.
ofrecen
These
soluciones
two
casi cero
alternatives
emisiones en su
offer
operación.
almost
Sin
zero
embargo, estas dos
emission
acciones pueden ser
solutions.
consideradas como
However,
emergentes en el
they
caso
are
de la
considered
battery
emerging,
electric o de la
especially in the case of
y
battery
experimental en el
electric,
caso hidrógeno.
and
Y varios
experimental
agentes
in
de
the case of
mercado han
hydrogen.
comenzado
And several
recientemente a
market agents
ofrecer
have started recently to
nuevas
offer
aplicaciones
new ships that are electrically driven and solutions at different scales. The electrical conversion of hydrogen is a second almost free emission solution. So we assessed all these possibilities because we know that these are getting stronger and stronger, and we need to find a way to comply with these very strict standards, and we need to also convert to new propulsion systems. In general terms, the application of hydrogen is still very expensive. As technology evolves, it might be possible that in the next years it will be cheaper. Right now, there are several research going on in different parts of the world, out of which I can give you many examples. In general terms, electrical solutions or battery-based solutions have been also developed at several scales. We have the Port Line or Sender Line projects in Europe, and also the energy capacity of batteries and storage possibilities. We have the e-power box, which are smaller size batteries that can be changed easily. And we have also made advance in the building of electrical ships or vessels. So these challenges expect and need large investment, and we need to work a lot on this still. So any of these options are related to the supply of renewable energy sources. So if electricity or electrical or battery-based mobility and hydrogen can achieve long-term zero emissions mobility goals, then we will have a third option that can be found, a transition solution to wait for the development of these more sophisticated long-term solutions.
Thank you, Gordon.
Vamos contigo, Jorge, por favor, como consultor líder del estudio. Si por favor nos pudieras
So,
compartir
could you please
cuáles son
share
las opciones que
what
convergen
are the
entre las
options
posibles
converging among the
con la
possibilities
situación
there
actual del
are
transporte y la
with the current
dinámica de la
situation of
hidrovía
transport and the dynamics
Paraguay-Paraná y
of the
cuáles fueron las
Paraguay-Paraná
principales
Waterway and
recomendaciones?
what were the main recommendations? Thank you very much. The findings in the study in relation to the match observed between the needs for decarbonization of marine fuels and the current operation of the waterway could be summarized as follows, Roberto. First, we've identified that the NLG is perceived as the alternative fuel that is widely available in the region, lowest price and eco-friendliness, in order to replace the marine gas oil that we are using today in the waterway. So why are we saying that this is the one that is most widely used in the region? Well, the current reserves of natural gas in Vaca Muerta, in Bolivia, and in Brazil, as well as the gas pipelines of interconnection that exist right now, will ensure the supply of the demand of the waterway that has been estimated in 100,000 cubic meters a year. In addition, the experience in Argentina in the use of NLG in order to extend the use of NLG to trucks and buses are possibilities that would create very interesting synergies in a future substitution project in the waterway. So in this category, we also observe an emerging technology in the region for the liquefaction of natural gas in small scale. So if we consider Bolivia's experience that has virtual gas pipelines underway already with this new technology, And we also have the experience of Buquebus, a ferry company with the Francisco ferry that has been operating since 2014 using natural liquefied gas. So with this technology available, we could liquefy natural gas that is supplied through the pipeline from the mentioned fields and give the autonomy necessary for the vessels. Another important factor that we mentioned in the study is that the price per calorie of natural gas would be lower than that of the replaced fuels. This would allow us to reduce the operating costs. In relation to the eco-friendliness, the NLG would allow for eliminating the emissions of sulfide and also the reduction in nitrous gases if we compare to the currently used fuels. There are also prospects to reduce CO2 as well. It has also been observed regionally as an alternative that the global demand also shows a more accelerated growth prospects compared to other alternative fuels. And this international experience shows that the high power of vehicles used in the waterway now can be adapted or refitted or retrofitted in order to include these new tanks in order to move in the 3,000 kilometers as we mentioned in the waterway. The second point and the second aspect that was studied, in addition to electricity, hydrogen, as Gordon mentioned before, and the NLG, is related to the biodiesel. We all know that there is a high production of biodiesel in terms of quality and quantity, and we believe that this fuel will join the bunker mixes in a progressive and natural manner, considering that the specifications of the international maritime organizations are increasingly limited in terms of sulfur content. So, in favor of this fuel, we could say that the entire infrastructure, the engineering, and the distribution logistics is already set up in order to supply diesel engines in land fleets. So in that sense, there would be no need for new investments and no need to change the current premises and facilities. Maybe the weak point is that the price of biofuels is related to the international price of soybean oil, and in that sense, it cannot compete in price with the NLG, as I said before. Thank you, Jorge. Tatiana, recently there has been an effect of the limit of emissions in transport. What are the regulations that we should consider in this case?
Of course. Thank you, Roberto. Just recently, in November, there was the publication of Resolution 438 from the Argentine Secretary of Energy that establishes certain specifications in the supply of natural gas from tanker trucks to vessels that operate in Argentina and that have this fuel for their engines. So this is the first precedent for the development of other regulations for transportation in the waterway. To develop this Resolution 438, we considered the ISO international standards that is referred to LNG transfer and supply to ships from tankers. throughout the waterway, almost 100% of the ships and vessels are based on oil, liquid fuels, maritime fuels or gasoline. So this is very interesting. We should highlight the Francisco ferry that operates with LNG, and when this ferry started operating in 2014 in the Plata Basin, there were no resolutions, and they operated based on specific authorizations granted by the government. They were provisional ones, but now they are now mandated by this new resolution. So it's also important to mention that there is international regulation. As of 2017, we have the International Safety Vessel Management Code for different fuels. It is called the ISM. This code contains a lot of regulations for the transfer of fuels to ships and vessels, and it is focused on LNG. And also there are other standards for certification that are based on the regulation by the International Maritime Organization, IMO in English. The IMO is driving forward, especially as of January 2020, more rigid regulations aimed at reducing by 85% sulfur content in maritime fuels. So this will have a positive impact on the empowerment of LNG as a replacement fuel throughout the waterway, and this must also be considered for other international waterways. So in the interest of time and to conclude, I would like to say that we have two precedents or background, the resolution 438 and the international precedent that I mentioned. So we have a lot of work to do. We need, of course, a harmonization of technical standards by all countries involved in the waterway. Thank you very much to all panelists. To summarize, as you have seen in the study, we are focusing in analyzing options to increase productivity, reduce operating costs, and reduce contaminants. In the next session, we will talk about many elements and aspects involved in this sense to be able to identify opportunity areas that will allow us to act on the short term to achieve our shared vision of a cleaner and more competitive waterway. So now we will pass on the mic to Andres Zuni, Director of OLADE Studies and Projects, that will moderate our cost preliminary session.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Well, as we heard, we are here on behalf of OLADE, also the IDB, and this project was carried out in a limited time, so the issue of costs was not fully addressed. And we consider that in order to provide for a more complete picture in the study, it was very important to appoint two leaders of naval engineering. So first, we are going to call Mr. Raul Podetti from the Argentine Association of Naval Engineering. He's going to share with us some benchmark estimations to fully understand the costs involved. So I would like to give Raul the floor. He's going to make a presentation. Thank you very much, Andres. It is a great honor for me to be part of this workshop and to talk about such an important issue, which has to do with the economic impact of the liquefied natural gas as one of the alternatives for decarbonization, particularly in the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. So, I'm going to talk about the results of a short research study that we are conducting and two publications on the region and on the waterway that we are conducting, which is part of this collection, Industria Azul, and also important papers. Particularly, we are going to talk about the impact, the economic impact on this leap from diesel oil to the use of naval LNG in the waterway transportation in the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway. There's good news here, and it is that in the waterway, thanks to the LNG, contamination and costs are reduced. For this, I'm going to share with you the cost matrix, the plans, the ships from the CAPEX investment side and the operating cost, the OPEX side, providing our values of reference or benchmark values. In relation to the investment in ships, we estimate 800,000 HAPs that we multiply by $1,400 in relation to cost, and we add 25-30% for the higher cost of gas. And this is related to the investment analysis versus power that we conducted in several cases. It would be $1,700 per HP as reference. If we multiply this by the 800,000 HPs, we reach $1.4 billion. So many shipyards in the region could be built, estimating $135 million a year. So this allows to have an initial CAPEX idea. Now let's move on to the next slide. Next. In relation to the operating costs, we can say that the expected savings depends on two variables. Consumption on the one hand, and the cost difference between gas versus fuel. If we take studies from the US and Europe, and if we apply them to the waterway, we can estimate savings from 20 to 40%. If we multiply by the average value of a freight cost in the waterway, we get $6 per ton. If we multiply by 22 million tons a year, we get to 132 million a year. So let's talk about the micro view of a business person. This model takes into account investment versus power, the expected savings versus consumption, and finally consumption versus power. This last point is based on several cases from Ohio and of several European waterways. We can create a model in this way that shows the internal rate of return versus the price difference of the fuel, showing a range. On the upper part, as we can see, the investment considered in this analysis shows the cost difference between building a conventional ship, whereas on the lower part, we can see the total investment of that situation. If we take a middle point, we are at around 15 or 20% of internal return rate. This shows that these are reliable and positive business investments. Next. If we talk about liquefaction plants, we first need to analyze the logistics in the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway. For that, we considered these virtual gas pipelines in the market. This is the case of the solution adopted by Buquebus company in order to fuel Francisco Ferry. The important thing is that liquefaction allows us to have a scalable and fast solution. We are talking about a matter of months in order to set up a liquefaction plant. And there are two areas. One in the Barranqueras area, where we have the gas pipelines on the waterway in order to take the natural gas, and additional warehouses that could be in Asunción, Posadas, Encarnación, because liquefied natural gas can be stocked, unlike the natural gas that is stored in very big tanks. It is also important to consider that in order to analyze the liquefaction logistics in the waterway, we need to consider the export opportunities to Paraguay and Brazil. If we talk about the investment costs in these plants, what we did was take 17 recent cases and we analyzed the relationship between the investments in liquefaction and the annual volumes. So we have a good regression model. So for the 1,000 cubic meters of diesel oil that we estimate today that are in the waterway in the Argentine ports, this equals 2.5 BTUs a year, million BTUs. So this means $3 million of net investments in liquefaction. If we add 50% of cost of warehouse and transportation, we are talking about an investment worth $20 million at least to cover the costs and the capital of infrastructure for liquefaction. If we talk about the operating costs of the plants, with $1.50 in terms of BTUs, we can get the liquefaction of the gas, which, if we add transportation costs, other costs, and the financial cost, of course, we would be around $4.3 per million BTUs, according to the pre-pandemic information, of course. But this is more or less half the final cost of $10 to $12 million per million BTUs. So this cost matrix that we just saw is what a ship owner considers in order to get to solutions. So the business person has these costs in a box. These are called internal or private costs. Business people know these costs to the cent. But these are not the only costs. We know that pollution and contamination also creates costs in the healthcare, in the environment, in crop, and these are also costs that our politicians and our leaders should take a look at, because they are the ones, the shareholders, they are the ones who must give the shareholders the necessary answers. These are the public costs which are in a limbo. Nobody talks about them. Nobody knows them. Next. In order to get to know them, we went to Europe and we went a step ahead and we considered that for each European country, according to their waterways, there is one price of harmful emissions that if we extrapolate this information to the Argentine case, this allows us to estimate final savings of around $30 million a year worth of these external costs. To conclude, what we are seeing here is that this leap from diesel oil to LNG allows us in this decade to cancel the harmful emissions, to reduce CO2, to reduce operating costs, and to make investments that are easily recoverable. The main challenge is the shift to the bio-LNG that will allow us to reduce by 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement, to reduce CO2 by zero and increase operating costs, because the bio-LNG is slightly more expensive than the LNG. This information can be found in the Industria Azul collection on the website. It's available for use and everybody is invited to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raul. Very interesting. Obviously, we will have to continue addressing this topic, analyzing cost trends, but of course, very interesting presentation. And now I will pass the mic to Dr. Naval Engineer Pablo Padovesi, Senior Investigator of the Naval and Oceanic Engineering Lab in the Pesquisas Tecnológicas in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil. He will provide more details on cost estimates, more real cost estimates related to specific ships and vessels and the different conditioning parameters involved. Thank you very much. The mic is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to participate on this important event. Waterborne transport for trucking is the most efficient model in terms of energy. We are aware of this and we promote waterborne transport because of this. Now, it is important to bear in mind that we need to accept the challenge of reducing emissions to turn this transport more sustainable every day by replacing fuels, working instead with fuel oil, with natural gas in order to reduce emissions. This is a great challenge ahead of us. And the importance of understanding this challenge is that all the transporters will have to bear this in mind. So now, let's talk about costs. The costs involving these changes. Which are the changes in costs when we decide to work with natural gas? First and foremost, I'll explain as a physical constraint two situations. The onboard space for that gas and the vessel operating range, because we need to ensure an appropriate autonomy for the vessel. And of course, we need greater space to transport gas than to transport fuel oil, for example. So these are issues that need to be addressed as physical constraints. This is not that complex to solve in terms of engineering, but we need to consider this. As regards the economic and environmental constraints, these are costs, of course. It is important for us to evaluate the costs as regards the implementation and the operation, thinking about a new system in terms of these new fuels, but always considering that we are reducing external costs related to gas emissions. We need to consider this. The contribution of a change in fuels by a cleaner fuel represents external costs gain. And this is increasingly so. This will cause us to reduce emissions, and this is a very important environmental constraint that we need to take into account. Now, something related to costs that is very important is the fact that there's a cost difference between natural gas and diesel oil, for example. Natural gas is cheaper, but it could also have lesser costs from the moment when there's a greater utilization of this fuel. We have a greater infrastructure installed, a supply system that is appropriate, and there's a trend to reduce this cost. And so there's an increase in the cost difference between natural gas and diesel oil. So this becomes a very important factor in the future. The change towards LNG, I mean liquefied natural gas, tends to update fleet, to update antique fleet. They will be updated, and this has a cost that we need to show. We'll explain what those costs mean. But there's an advantage. It is that this fleet becomes more sustainable with lesser emissions. They're more updated, they're more secure and more efficient. And there's also a trend to have natural gas in its liquid state, which will be the most appropriate state. And this is a commodity. This load will be transported over the same waterborne to supply their vessels. There are different alternatives in terms of installations. I won't explain this to a greater extent, but there are different options in order for us to have, for example, two different kinds of motors that work with two different kinds of fuels, and gas-propelled motors or gas-propelled engines. We can modify the current engines and transform them so as to use gas, and then we will have the option to work with new engines. As an alternative, we could use gas-propelled engines as a direct propulsion, and gas-propelled engines generating energy to supply energy of an electrical motor that will work with this propulsion. That will be gas electric. This is a more expensive system that's not quite used, but it is possible. As I said before, I won't explain this in detail. So what does the adoption of natural gas or liquefied natural gas adoption mean in order to propel a vessel? Well, in general terms, these are specific tanks with a high cost because the gas has to be kept liquefied at very low temperatures. So these tanks have a particular characteristics. Next, please. On the left, you'll see a chart that I copied from a reference that explains the proportion of costs associated to the system of gas that's going to be installed in a vessel. This shows how the LNG tank is explained, how it is going to be installed. This also takes into account the safety measures, and this shows the cost of the engine as well. This is a very important aspect that we need to consider related to the cost composition on gas-propelled vessels. On the right, we see example of two vessels, their prices that were calculated as per a determined reference from Australia. that calculates then that, for example, for a vessel, an auxiliary vessel, and for a ferry boat. There we have a tug and a ferry boat. Diesel vessels and gas-propelled vessels that are clearly compared, and we see that the gas-propelled vessel will have a greater cost because of the need of being transported in specific and special tanks with high security measures. But on the other hand, you see a cost annual gas related to fuel that is quite low. In this study, we projected minimum costs for LNG in two different scenarios: the lesser cost of LNG and the greater cost of LNG. Even in the greater cost, you see that it is lower. The fuel expenditure cost is lesser than using a diesel oil. And this is very important for us to understand the proportion of savings that we have. And these savings in the operation costs justifies a greater expenditure, a greater investment cost in gas-propelled vessels. Next slide, please. Here we find different utilization examples. We have here 3 different vessels that use gas. Some of those have been using gas for the last 5 or 6 years. These vessels, the first one actually has 2 900 kilowatts engines. The other 2 have 1100 kilometers power, and they have a specific characteristic that from the LNG package, they have the tanks, the engines, and all the system, the safety system, and all the gas heating system in order for it to reach the engine. The whole system represents 1.2 million euros. This is an important aspect to consider because that will represent, let's say, the greater importance of this cost. The whole system of the gas utilization, engines, tanks, pipes, pumps, heaters, safety features, in order for these vessels to work, imply 1.2 million euros. And finally, this is my last slide, and it shows a study that was conveyed in Sweden with several vessels, and the vessel cost, or the cost of the vessels that were adapted to use gas compared to other vessels that were specifically built to be gas propelled. Here we always talk about the use of gas, but with double fuel oil plus gas, or a very low percentage of fuel oil plus gas. And in this comparison, we see that in these vessels, costs are very approximate. We have something like $800 per kilowatt in order to perform a modification of a gas-propelled vessel, and $1,600 per kilowatt of power for new vessels. These estimated costs are quite similar to those I showed in my previous slide of the vessels where costs were effectively higher while the vessels were specifically built. So these are very coherent with the costs that I consider to be, let's say, a reference to transform vessels that use fuel oil in order for them to become gas propelled vessels that use LNG. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Very interesting presentation. And with these elements at hand, we start getting a clear picture about the cost issue. As we advance in detail in the introduction of LNG in the waterway, we will have to approach more specific studies, but this is a general overview into the cost issue. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrés, Raúl, and Carlos, for your presentations. This is a very promising panorama. I now will pass the mic to Ariel Shepes, IDB Energy Division Head. He will moderate the panel with international and regional energy agencies. This is a very interesting panel regarding the vision of regional and international energies on the decarbonization of water transport. Very interesting topics. It is a pleasure for me to moderate this panel. This agenda, I'm sure, will interest all of our participants. And of course, we have an extraordinary opportunity to have the participation of several members that have vast experience on issues related to transport decarbonization at a regional and at an international scale. We will begin now our conversation with Ricardo Sanchez and Silvana Sanchez Domenico from the International Trade and Integration Division of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. Ricardo and Silvana, it is a pleasure to be here with you. Welcome to this panel. We would like to understand, if you will explain us, what is the incidence of river and maritime transport in general terms in Latin America on global emissions of CO2. Could you please provide details on these topics? Thank you very much, Ariel. And thank you, of course, for the invitation. I will share with you our PPTs. This will be presented together with Silvana. Let's say that to start, I believe it's important to highlight the depending nature of Latin American economies on CO2 emissions. If you please, Silvana, show the first slide. I will very briefly show you that the transport and logistics sector within the economies, this is a sample that was taken throughout the entire world, including Latin America, you will see that logistics and transport participation within the different regional countries are within quite similar levels, whether these are more advanced, more developed, or less developed countries. So we can see that there's a variation of around 15 to 19%. But if we compare our Latin American countries with the rest of the sample economies, we can see that the total multiplication participation of hydrocarbons that have CO2 emissions, it's much higher than the more advanced economies. This is a comparison between 2005 and 2015. So this evolution has taken place, but it hasn't reduced CO2 emission participation in the economies. We will see this in our next slide. This is related to CO2 emissions of the different exports and imports in Latin America. And I would like to underscore, and Silvana will complete this presentation, that our sampling, which was of about 80% of exports, 82% of exports in Latin America, the waterways percentage exceeds the rest of the countries. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good day to all of you. I would like to briefly show you the results of a study carried out by ECLAC regarding Latin American CO2 emissions compared to international scenario. And I will show you how we started. It was a sample for the region, Latin American region countries, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Mexico, and Uruguay. This sample was built considering the main exports and imports, and they were organized in a relevance hierarchy based on tonnage and volume. And of course, we also consider the different pairs, origin and destination. So we also chose the main ports in the different countries. After selecting these products, we specified the type of vessels and ships most frequently used. We also talked to the main ship owner to assess the different routes, ships used, and types of products transported through these waterways, and also consider the origin destination pairs. And then the results in general terms, before going to the final results, I would like to say that most of exports in our sample and also imports are predominantly commodities. So except for some specific cases where we included manufactured products. This is via containers with a special logic within the analysis. We would like to mention just that. And the results are the ones that you can see on screen from an exports sample of a total exports sample out of 64 million tons. Results show that around 24 million, well, these exports, she corrects herself, generate around 24 million tons of equivalent CO2. And if we take into consideration the amount of tons emissions in maritime transportation is around 3.8%. As for exports, out of 311 million tons transported, that generate 6 million tons of equivalent CO2. And of course, if we consider the total of CO2 emissions in tons of maritime international trade, this represents 0.6% of the total amount. So these are our results. And also we should consider an important piece of information, which is that we need to know that the Latin American and Caribbean trade volume represents 18% of global trade. This is for you to have an idea of the amounts and magnitudes that we're dealing with.
Excelente. Vamos entonces. Gabriel
Castellanos de Irene at the International Agency of Renewable Energy Program Officer. Gabriel, what is the IRENA view as regards the energy transition in the maritime and river transportation, and what is your opinion as to the situation for the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway? So we would like to know your opinion. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to greet all participants on behalf of my agency, IRENA. Undoubtedly, the work being conducted for the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway in relation to the importance of the transportation, economic importance for South America and the Southern Cone. According to the study conducted by OLADE and the IDB, green nitrogen is expected to become one of the key pillars for the total decarbonization of maritime transportation. At IRENA, at global level last year, at the World Summit organized in Singapore, part of the Global Maritime Forum discussed an analysis on an exploration of the maritime sector and the possibility of renewable fuels for decarbonization. At present, IRENA is part of a global coalition that works with public and private stakeholders, including businesses and waterway operators. And in the long term, we see that green hydrogen through electrolysis driven by energy, renewable energies, are the basis for the total decarbonization by 2050. We know that fuels such as ammonia, methanol produce green nitrogen, and they will characterize the path towards decarbonization. And under the current regulatory framework, and considering the situation of the electrofuels for the maritime fuels, are not the only source, but the price and availability of fuels will be the decisive factors in the final selection of the fuel. Other key factors throughout this pathway will require the cost of adapting the infrastructure, both ships, vessels, and ports, the technological maturity that will also be attained. Another decisive point will be the will and the willingness to pay a higher price for fuel on the part of the end user. However, as the adoption of clean energy is increasing, we know that the prices will go down and regulations will become more favorable. So it's expected that the prices of renewable energies will become excessively competitive. But all of these developments will require a global effort that requires cooperation both from the public and the private sector. They should show the viability of the importance of green nitrogen in maritime transportation. Considering the availability of natural resources and alternative resources in Latin America, the region can take the lead in the green alternatives for the naval sector in particular. And I would also like to take this opportunity to invite all the members present here to join the efforts conducted by all the agencies, all the organizations, all the stakeholders that are part of this industry. We are all decided and determined to move forward. We know there are many challenges, so this process poses a series of opportunities. We need to focus on the important economic growth that this process can create. So with these final words, thank you very much. And again, I give you the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Very interesting information. Thank you for sharing your vision and the vision of the International Agency of Renewable Energy on this important topic. Now, we are going to listen to Miguel Moyano, who is the Executive Secretary of the Regional Association of Companies in the Oil and gas sector and biofuel sector in Latin America and Caribbean, RPEL. Miguel, from the perspective of a partnership of hydrocarbon companies as RPEL represents, what is the feeling and the impression on decarbonization? Can you share your view in this regard?
Good day. It is a pleasure to be a part of this panel. This important initiative to optimize the use of energy in the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. I would like to thank the organizers, the Waterway Intergovernmental Commission, the IDB, and the panelists. Climate change is undoubtedly one of the most important challenges that obliges us to redefine the way we produce and consume and use energy to go forward in the reduction of greenhouse effects emissions. And OLADE is a big player in this, and of course, this is a key factor for economic development. And of course, we need to comply with the expectations of the Paris Agreement, and this requires cooperation among all players: government, public, private companies, academia, international organizations, NGOs. So the technical report developed by OLADE and IDB is of great value, not only because it shows a multi-institutional approach, but it also allows us to address a conversation for energy transition in order to make better decisions and drive forward beneficial changes for the countries that are part of the waterway. After a high-level debate amongst the different companies and our process in the participation of the G20 meetings, we developed the White Book in order to make energetic transitions in Latin American and Caribbean countries. This is a downloadable, a free access book, which represents a very important commitment of RPEL companies, both private and public, and it's the only document that reflects the position of a highly significant segment in the industry of oil and gas in Latin America. To support this transition process, we need safety and legal stability to guarantee investment return and the incorporation of adequate technologies. In many cases, this will require a complementation of the private and public sectors, and RPEL has experience in meeting the interest and matching the interest of both private and public companies and associations, and to collaborate in a cooperation fashion with different entities in the region and at governmental levels in dealing with regional and regional entities. We must remember that the strategies adopted by countries for the transition process will depend on multiple national factors, especially their own sustainable development goals. And due to the fact that Latin American countries' realities differ, the strategies for transition will always and also be different. So we need to highlight that natural gas plays an essential role in a region, especially in the economies and energy matrices, and it represents over 50% of the Argentine's energy grid, and Vaca Muerta has been one of the main attraction poles for direct foreign investment. In Bolivia, natural gas represents a little bit less than 1/3 of their exports, and hydrocarbons industry is one of the main contributors to their fiscal growth. And of course, we have at a sub-regional level, we have a structure, an infrastructure for processing natural gas liquefaction, suppliers and value chains that can provide efficient services. And this is not a minor issue when choosing transition development. And of course, the waterway plays a key role in the economies of the region in logistics and trade. The OLADE bid report shows that that annually there's over 36 million tons of cargo, cereals and minerals in approximately 2,500 tugboats, 300 tugboats, and many others self-propelled ships. And there is an analysis of the different energy and technological tools, and of course, natural gas, because of their potential benefits and maturity, has the best possibilities to be implemented in the short term. So we are certain that we have the political will in the country and the region to continue developing these alternative fuels to improve its own economic development. And our commitment in the White Book, Artel and its associated companies are willing to participate to search and implement solutions as the ones that are being proposed by OLADE and IDB in the mentioned report. So this is the essence of our vision on this topic. Very complete analysis. Thank you very much, Miguel, and very interesting vision. Undoubtedly, natural gas has a privileged position, not just to become a transition fuel, but also to be a crucial agent in reduction of greenhouse effect emissions at all levels and at all economic activities, especially in the issue of river.
Now we are going to give the floor to Juan Ramón Morante. He is the director of the Institute of Energy Research in Catalonia. So I would like to ask Juan Ramon's view on Europe. How has it been like in energy transition for these applications? And also, from your perspective, Juan Ramón, could you briefly comment on the European experience in this regard and how could this be applied to Latin America? Thank you, Ariel. It is a great pleasure for me to be here in order to share with you my European experience. As you know, Europe is concerned about the healthcare of the people, the health of the planet too, and so it must address different contaminating factors, not just CO2. If we take a look at the consumption of fuels, we can see that navigation, without being the most important part, it is significant. And so Europe has decided to take action in this regard. Everyone knows that since this year, the European Union has approved a legislation on sulfur emissions, which is in line with the conditions of the International Maritime Organization in the same way. Not only the limit has been made on the emissions of sulfur, but also the alternatives must be discussed. Different fuels with lower sulfur have been analyzed, including, of course, liquefied natural gas. In this sense, this is one first stage of energy transition where Europe tries to be a leading part in order to solve the contamination issues, but also as part of this energy transition, the use of liquefied natural gas in terms of costs has been considered positive for the sector. Second, it has different simulations that have supported the study in order to gather public and private support. It could reduce the emissions of particles of nitrous oxide and sulfur oxides. In this way, a policy has been implemented in many European ports, river ports, and maritime ports. Of all the ports that exist, the most significant ports have been selected, those that have a higher volume of goods and passengers. In those ports, facilities of liquefied natural gas have been set up. The loading is not conducted in the same way. It must be adapted to the various types of ships and vessels. But the most important thing of these studies that have promoted the actions in Europe is that more must be invested in the capex of the new vessels, in their new construction. But if the amortization conditions are considered, the savings in fuels, as you can see on the chart on the right in blue, considerably offsets the capex investment. So economically speaking, this is being considered as a viable alternative. We must also consider that this situation has led many port areas of many cities that had been considered as focuses of contaminating areas, particularly cities in ports, separating these areas away from the lives of the cities, considering the cleaner fuels like LNG. An integration has been viable, has materialized. So there has been an inflow of tourists, an exchange of goods in many of these cities, accounting for a total benefit in port areas in these geographical areas. So the contamination, as we know, has been considered in the Baltic Sea. Considering this is a shallow sea, the contamination of seawater is strongly and strictly controlled. So now the legislation has become stricter, not so strict in the Mediterranean. However, there are some treaties that are being put in place in order to manage the situation as well, with the purpose of avoiding the air and water contamination. And finally, in relation to the river navigation, in Europe, this is not the most important sector, but there are 9,000 kilometers. And the progress and advances of these new fuels and the legislation to avoid contamination has been collected in the White Book of River Navigation. So for you to have an idea, in ports like Rotterdam or Hamburg, they are also as important as the Vienna ports, thanks to this new momentum. Finally, two main aspects. With the use of the liquefied natural gas, there has been a reduction of CO2 emissions and other pollutants. So Europe is working on making synthetic fuels for navigation as a future alternative to this stage of liquefied natural gas. So effectively, there is a green pact in Europe approved by the Parliament that seeks to reach zero emissions by 2050. So in addition to favoring this use of synthetic fuels, there are new options like hydrogen. This is collected in what is called as the European Green Deal. This is a summary of what this deal includes, why there is this importance in having airports, green ports in many cities with alternative fuels, with biofuels as an alternative, hydrogen for land services, but also for the future, for other services in the ships and vessels, reducing the emissions of any transportation of maritime goods and gaining efficiency. When we say zero emission ports by 2030, the idea is not so much the emissions coming out from the ships, but of each and every land service at the port too. So this is the strategy of Europe. Very good, very complete information provided by the panelists about the different options to decarbonize the fluvial and the river transport in the Paraguay-Paraná Waterway. So what we see now is that there are different options. There are economic factors which are key to make the best decisions, and those economic decisions are also based on a time concept. Natural gas is a very interesting transition option. If we think about a longer term, of course, we need to think of other alternatives, decarbonization alternatives that may be more oriented to the substitution of fuels. Thank you all. Thank you, Ricardo, Silvana, Miguel, Jose Ramon, and Gabriel. Have a great day.
Muchas gracias, Ariel, y a los distinguidos panelistas.
Thank you, Ariel.
Bueno,
Thank
hemos
you to
recibido
our
muchos
distinguished
comentarios
panelists. We have
en
received a
nuestra
lot
sala
of
de chat,
comments,
Mariano
remarks, and
respondado
questions in our
a
chat
muchas de
room,
ellas.
and we would
Para
like
eso
to
invitamos
answer
a
most of
Mariano
them. So
Álvarez
we have
Wagner,
invited
del
Mariano
Comité
Alvarez Wagner
Intergubernamental de
from
Bolivia,
the
que
Waterway
moderará la sesión.
Intergovernmental Committee
Adelante, Mariano, por
to
favor.
moderate the
Muchas
Q&A
gracias,
session. Thank
Roberto.
you very much,
Hemos
Roberto. We have
recibido un gran número
received
de
a
preguntas
number of
con la intención de
questions,
cubrir todas
and
las
the attempt
inquietudes que
is
han
to
manifestado a
cover
través de
all
las
of
distintas
the
redes a través de las que se está proyectando el taller.
comments, questions, and
Hemos tratado
remarks
de
through the
agruparlas y tratar de
different
responder
social
integralmente a las
media.
cosas
We
más
have tried to
representativas.
group them and try to
Empezaría
answer
por una
most
pregunta
of the
para Miguel Moyano, el
questions. One
secretario
question
ejecutivo de
for
ARPEL,
Miguel
la
Moyano,
Asociación Regional
ARPEL
del Sector
Executive
Petróleo,
Director
Gas y
for the
Biocombustibles en
Association
América
of
Latina y el
Companies
Caribe.
dedicated
Y
to
la
gas
pregunta,
oil
Miguel, dice así:
in Latin
existen
America.
varias
There are
alternativas
several
tecnológicas con
technological
mayor o
alternatives
menor nivel de
with
madurez.
higher
¿Por
or
qué
lesser
entiende que el gas
maturity
natural
levels.
sería la más
Why do you
apropiada?
think that natural gas is the most appropriate one?
Gracias.
Well, thank you.
Nosotros creemos que el
We
gas
believe
natural
that
posee una
natural
serie de características que lo hacen más atractivo para el
gas
desarrollo de
has
nuestra región.
several
Y eso lo
characteristics
destaca el
that
informe
make it more
de
attractive
OLADE.
for our region. And this is
El primer
also
aspecto
highlighted in the OLADE
relevante
report.
es la madurez de la
The
tecnología.
most relevant
Hoy en día
one
toda la
is
tecnología
the technology
necesaria para
level.
hacer la
The
conversión está
necessary
disponible en el
technology
mercado
for
y
conversion
ha
is
sido probada
available
en
in the
otras
market,
regiones.
and it has been
Incluso
tested
tenemos
in
un
other
ejemplo muy
regions. We have
cercano de
a
existencia de
very
conducción a gas natural de
good
una línea de
example
servicio
by
entre
the
Montevideo
ferry
y Buenos Aires.
between Buenos Aires and
Además,
Montevideo with
el informe
great
plantea que
results.
los
And
tiempos de recuperación
the
de la inversión para
report
la
says
adaptación
that
de
the
las mismas
timing
operaciones están en
for
el
the
rango de 4
recovery
hasta 15
and
años,
adaptation is around
dependiendo de la tecnología, de la potencia, de los precios de
4
los
and 15 years,
energéticos,
depending on technology,
etcétera.
power of the
Y son
ships,
tiempos
price
razonables
of
de
the
retorno de la
energy
inversión,
sources.
pero
And these
también
are
deben darse
reasonable times
simultáneamente
for the
los
return of the
mecanismos de
investment, but we
financiamiento
must also
y de
work
fomento de la
simultaneously
inversión.
on
Hay otro
funding
aspecto que
tools
quizá fue
and
mencionado y es la
investment
disponibilidad de los
promotion, and
recursos de
also
la región.
availability of
Bolivia
resources
y
in the region.
Argentina son
Bolivia
países
and
ricos en gas,
Argentina are rich
que
countries
generan
as to
oportunidades de
natural
desarrollo de sus
gas. We
mercados
can
y
develop
asociado
these
a esto hay una vasta
markets, and we
experiencia
have vast
con el gas
experience
natural
with
comparado con
natural
otras opciones
gas,
tecnológicas.
otherwise
Por lo que
not so much
naturalmente
experience
se
with
demoraría
other
más tiempo en
sources, so
desarrollarse y
that would
traería
take
resultados
longer
más
to
cortos.
develop and it would
Es decir, que
increase
es una
cost.
solución costo
So this is
efectiva,
a cost-effective
capaz de generar
solution
inversiones y de reducir hasta
capable
un
of
20% las
generating
emisiones de
investment
dióxido
and
de carbono
reducing
y casi en
CO2
la totalidad
emissions by
de particulares y
20%
otros
and
contaminantes.
other contaminants as well.
Como bien
And
plantea el informe, el
the
desarrollo del gas para el abastecimiento de buques en la hidrovía se
report
alinea con las
says
iniciativas de
that
abastecimiento y
this
distribución
is aligned
de
with the
gas
initiatives
natural
for supply
licuado
and
que
distribution
ya
of
están en marcha
liquefied
en distintas
natural gas,
naciones.
which are ongoing in
Por tanto,
Argentina.
las inversiones en
Therefore,
infraestructura específica para este
specific
proyecto,
infrastructure
para este plan de
investments for
estudios,
this
serán
project
acotadas
would be
porque se van a basar
smaller
en un proyecto
because they
mayor,
will
lo cual
be
hace que esta opción
included in a
tenga ventajas
larger
competitivas
framework. And
frente a
this
otras
has
alternativas en la
competitive
industria de sustitución
advantages compared
debido
to
al desarrollo
other
relativo que ya
replacement
tiene el gas
fuels.
natural en la región.
And
Hay un
there's
punto quizá que
another
me gustaría
issue that I would like to
rescatar. Todos sabemos que la innovación va a ser clave para lograr la transición
underscore.
hacia
We
una
know that
economía
innovation
baja
will
en
be key to
carbono
achieve
y aquí
transition
entramos
to a
en un
low
terreno
carbon economy.
estratégico a
And
iniciar
this
por lo
is a
menos dos.
strategic ground. And we have
Una
two
alternativa
sides
es
to
que las
it. One
políticas
alternative is
gubernamentales
for
destinadas a
governmental
reducir las
policies
emisiones de gas
for
efecto
the
invernadero
reduction of
y están
greenhouse
asociadas al
effect
consumo
emissions
energético, por
associated to
supuesto,
energy
respetan la
consumption,
neutralidad
respect
tecnológica, fomentando
technological
la
neutrality,
competencia y la
inviting
innovación en el
competition
sector
and
privado y la
innovation in
industria,
the
en vez de
private
dar una
sector and
clara
the market
visibilidad
instead
para lograr
of
el objetivo
just
final.
giving us a specific
Sin
path
embargo,
to achieve the goal.
Considerando el
But
aporte de la
considering
extracción de
the
petróleo, gas y biocombustibles de las economías de América Latina,
contribution
es
of
más que
biofuels
razonable que
and
los
petroleum
gobiernos de la
in the
región
economies, it's more than
quieran
reasonable
desarrollar
for
políticas
the
que
region's
apuesten
governments to want to
explícitamente
develop
el uso de
policies
ciertas
that
tecnologías
support
con
the use
bajas
of
emisiones
certain
de carbono,
technologies with low carbon
pero dando
emission,
preferencia al consumo de
but
sus propios
giving
recursos
some
energéticos
preference to
para
their
continuar
consumption of their
desarrollando
own
sus economías
energetic
y
sources to develop
simultáneamente
their own
contribuir
economies and
a la
also
reducción de emisiones
contribute
de
to
gases de
the
efecto
reduction
invernadero.
of
En
greenhouse
resumen,
effect emissions.
estos
So to
países
sum up,
van a
these
querer
countries will
promover el uso
want
de
to
gas
promote
natural y de servicios
natural
y
gas, its
tecnologías
services, and
asociadas a sus
associated
productos.
technologies.
En
Therefore,
fin, está
it is
claro que
quite
la
clear
tecnología
that
va a seguir
technology will
evolucionando, que hay otras
continue
tecnologías que serán más
progressing and there will
competitivas
be
en el
other
futuro,
technologies
pero
more
el desarrollo del
competitive
gas natural puede ser perfectamente compatible con
in the
otras
future,
fuentes
but
como el
natural gas
biometano o incluso el
development
litio.
will be
Por eso
compatible with
también es
biomethane and
importante
other
generar estos
sources.
espacios de
So it's
diálogo
important to
entre
generate
distintas
these
tecnologías
debates
para impulsar
as we have
políticas que
here
sean
to drive
coherentes, que
forward
estén articuladas
coherent,
y que
articulated
permitan programar
policies that allow
adecuadamente la
a
sustitución
programming
tecnológica
of
para avanzar
technological
un
substitution
mejor camino
to
para la transición.
walk our path towards transition. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. Creo que tu respuesta echa luz
Thank
a
you
una
very
pregunta
much,
que se
Miguel.
manifestó
I
de
believe
varias formas y
that
es
your
reiterada a través
answer
de
has
todas las
really
redes donde
shed some light
estamos
to a
transmitiendo.
reiterated
Paso a otra
a
pregunta
question that has been
para
posted
Jorge
in our
Chicharelli,
social
consultor
media.
especialista
The
para el
next
Banco
question for
Interamericano de
Jorge
Desarrollo,
Chicharelli,
OLADE. Y la
consultant
pregunta dice así,
specialist for the
en tu
Inter-American
exposición de hoy
Development
mencionaste que
Bank
el
and
volumen de
OLADE. And the
combustible
question
búnker
is, in
consumido
your
en la hidrovía
presentation
y
today, you
potencial a ser
mentioned
reemplazado
that the
no
volume of
llega a los 100.000
bunker
metros
fuel
cúbicos al año.
used in the
¿Cuál
waterway that
sería el
could be
volumen a
replaced
reemplazar si
doesn't reach
consideráramos otros puertos que están ubicados
100,000 cubic
geográficamente
meters?
cerca,
What would be the
pero no
volume to
entran dentro de la
consider if
jurisdicción de
we
gobernanza de la
considered
hidrovía?
other geographically near ports but are not under the jurisdiction of the waterway? As a matter of fact, the volume that is traded in other ports that are not formally part within the area of the waterway, such as the ports of Buenos Aires, La Plata, and Bahía Blanca, which is not so near the port of Montevideo. If we consider all the volume combined, the figure is 10 times higher as that consumed within the waterway. So we are talking about 800,000 cubic meters a year. So evidently, this is a very high number, and it would be, let's say, a parallel objective of the study that the case of the waterway could be considered as a leading case to then expand the same decarbonization process
Muchas
of
gracias, Jorge,
marine
por la
fuels to
respuesta.
these
Creo
other
que clarificó
alternatives, to
mucho
these other
la
ports.
inquietud de nuestra
Thank you,
audiencia.
Jorge, for your
Ahora
answer.
voy a
I
tratar
think that it really
de integrar
clarified
varias preguntas de la
our
audiencia. Sería
audience's
para Raúl
questions.
Podetti,
Now
de
I'm
la
going
Asociación
to
Argentina de
combine
Ingeniería Naval.
several questions for Raúl
Y
Podetti from the
las
Argentine
preguntas serían
Association
así.
of Naval
¿Cuál sería el impacto
Engineering.
de la
And the
reducción del
questions
costo
are as
logístico
follows.
esperado de esta transición
What
al gas
would be
natural
the
licuado?
impact of the
Y
reduction of the
cómo deberían tenerse
logistics
en cuenta los
cost
costos
in
externos
this
a las
transition to
externalidades de esta operación?
LNG? And
Por favor,
how
Raúl.
should we consider the external costs in the external factors that are involved? Thank you. And well, I am very happy that you combine these questions because they are absolutely linked. In relation to the first part of the logistics cost, or actually the logistics savings, whenever we discuss this matter with people in general, we always think about who keeps the booty. And in fact, there is a 30% of savings in logistics, that is to say $20 per ton of freight. We are talking about $132 million a year. So this is a very interesting savings figure. So we should think about who are the potential participants of this cost-saving benefit. Of course, the ship owners, they should aspire to at least part of that savings in order to cover for the new investments that they must make themselves in order to pay off the credit, the long-term credit, which should have interesting rates, by the way, as should happen in any sector and any industry that wishes to develop its naval industry. But in addition to the ship owners, there may be some fears that in this aspiration to gain more and more, the operators should have a higher profit in return, and that would be a problem. Ideally, we should get to a solution that allows to increase the volume of the cargo, because you should think that maybe those producers who are far away in Argentina, for instance, in the north of the country, today they can't participate because of the high logistic costs. So if costs are reduced, then that will open up the opportunity for them to participate. And this will be very important so that the impact of gas is not only environmental, but also, let's say, social. In relation to the external costs, related to the question that you made, in general, a successful policy when external costs are taken into account is that the one that generates the expense should take the charge. So if those external costs are reduced, for instance, the cost on the environment, the cost on the health, the cost on these deaths that are caused by contaminants, greenhouse gases. So if these are diluted or reduced among the population, it seems that they don't belong to anyone. So nobody takes charge. So the key here is to understand them very well and create the basis for the incentive and de-incentive systems. So this is public policy making. This process, which is key, is called internalization of or assimilation of internal costs. So this means, for instance, that the shippers should take into account as part of their internal cost matrix all those costs that are put on society for not making the right decisions or the environmentally friendly decisions. So in the end, this will create a very strong demand of the river transportation. Because if we apply this not only to the shift from diesel to LNG, but also to the differential impact that the land transportation has between the waterways, so public policies for once and for all, after many, many years, public policies should help land transportation, which could use the waterway, finally use the waterway. And that will never happen if external costs are not shown or are ignored. So the one who generates the cost for society must take the charge. And this is conducted with the governments that must take the public policy into account.
Of course. course, definitely. You answered very well and you clarified the doubt. And you make reference to public policies combined with inclusion of externalities, because you are going to a less contaminating fuel, then you have answered quite well. And another question on another issue has to do with how, and this is what you were saying when you mentioned public policies. And I have one question for Gabriel Castellanos from IRENA, and the question is, what are some of the measures and actions that would enable the taking advantage of renewable fuels in international water and maritime transportation in the medium and long term? Thank you very much, Mariano, for your question. It's an excellent question. Right now, renewable fuels such as biofuels that are being used, the obvious would be to make sure that these biofuels are produced in a more sustainable way, but in the year 2030 or 2050, because right now the global debate is focused on the taking advantage of ammonium and methanol produced from green hydrogen. So in this way, green hydrogen will be the pillar for total decarbonization in the future. Although technical and financial aspects on how to decarbonize maritime transportation must be explored, it will be essential to consider the electrofuels volumes needed for 2050 and the consequences that these volumes will have in terms of renewable energies and investment. So it will be essential to have better understanding on the dynamics and drivers linked to the energy demands of international river transportation, have energy planning that focus on river and maritime international transportation. Within this energy transition period, apart from making sure that we have enough renewable sources available, we need to focus on conversion strategies. Two of the makers of engines for ship, most important companies in the world, are working on a ammonium-based engine, and it will be ready for 2025. Within this transition, it will be crucial to have measures and take precautions based on avoiding stagnant assets, as we say in English, and we need to also pay attention to some of the words mentioned by my predecessors, development of pilot products and the mechanisms of incentives and de-incentives that stimulate the use of renewable energy sources in ships. It is also important to highlight that river and maritime transportation has a regional and international nature, as what is happening in our waterway, but we need to have the involvement of public and private stakeholders. And with these final words, I return the mic to you. Thank you very much, Mariano. Thank you, Gabriel. I believe that we have answered many questions. We will be talking about the what and the how. We all agree on the what, and that is that we need some incentives as a way to mechanize this. I think, unfortunately, we cannot continue. These were the most representative questions from our audience. We could continue for an hour, but in the interest of time, we will conclude here. I thank you very much for your answers, and we will continue working with the help of the Executive Secretariat on such an interesting topic. Thank you, Mariano. We thank our audience for their questions and comments.
esta primera sesión damos la
And to
palabra a Agustina
conclude
Guerra,
this
gerente
first
de
session,
infraestructura del
we
BID,
will pass on the
quien
mic to
compartirá
Agustina
algunas
Guerra,
reflexiones finales.
Infrastructure
Adelante,
Manager
Agustín,
from
por favor.
IDB, who will share some final remarks.
Muchas
Thank you.
gracias, Roberto, y buen día a todos.
Thank
Quiero
you,
agradecer en
Roberto.
nombre del
Good
Banco
day to all
Interamericano
of
de
you. I would like
Desarrollo,
to thank on
al
behalf of
Comité
the
La Hidrovía
IDB
por
to
permitirnos
the
organizar este evento y cerrar
the Waterway Intergovernmental Committee for allowing us to organize this session. This is the closure of the first session. We have assessed technical and technological proposals for the decarbonization of river transportation. These benefit climate, the planet, and help the different countries achieve their climate change goals. But if they also have a return on the investment for the operators and carriers, they're unavoidable, and this is the way to go. This is the future. Technology will help us not just to improve climate, but also the cost and operations. Therefore, we are very happy because of the results of the study. I hope this is a good contribution both for you and the operating companies. This comes from the acknowledgement of the institutional importance of the CID, not just as an integration body, but also because of the management of the waterway. This is something that we have inherited from history. I will tell you a short anecdote. When I lived in my country in Uruguay, I dedicated myself to working on issues related to transportation, navigation, and ports. And the anecdote that I enjoy the most because of its importance was of the Ponsonby. He was a Visconti in England at the end of the 1820s. He lived between Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro, and because of a mandate of the British Empire, he was in charge of mediating and solving the conflict, the Argentina and Brazil, because of Uruguay, the control of Uruguay. This was a strategic position for British interests in the region. Uruguay came from declaring its independence from the Brazilian Empire, but its inclusion within the provinces of the Rio de la Plata, we had debate, discussion, diplomacy, and with the participation of Lord Ponsonby on October 4th, 1828, we signed the preliminary peace agreement, which in a way designs an independent state, now Uruguay, between two big powers, Argentina and Brazil, now place located in the mouth of the waterway of Latin America. And this is, well, diplomatic story, but Lord Ponsonby in 1830 was sent on a special mission by the government to Belgium to promote the ascent of Leopoldo to the new kingdom of Belgium. So Lord Ponsonby contributed to the creation of that new state, which by a coincidence is an independent state between two powers, France and Germany, and it's also located at the mouth of a waterway with kilometers of canals that link the heart of Europe with the Northern Sea. So same development and this gigantic potential of waterways, this has had different impacts in Europe and in America. So we need to make our waterway stronger. This is a mandate that comes from history, and it's also an economic need for the growth of our region. So from IDB, we want to accompany this process. So today we're working at the instances of the Colombian government in the development of the Rio Magdalena waterway that joins the productive heart of the southern area in Colombia to the Caribbean Sea by the Barranquilla Barranquilla mouth and Cartagena. So working with the government of Colombia and the transportation minister, we visited the Paraná-Paraguay Waterway, and then we invited her to visit the Mississippi River Waterway managed by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. And so we went there to learn and to see how they manage navigation, the drafting of the river. And we found that apart from that management, the U.S. Corps of Engineers was a true development agency. I will tell you a short story to illustrate this point. The mouth of the Mississippi in the Gulf of of Mexico was very rich in the production of oysters, high quality products, and Americans are proud of that. But a decade ago, there was a period of low tides at the Mississippi, so the entire basin and the mouth was invaded by the Gulf of Mexico, and this increased the saltiness, and that destroyed the industry of oysters. So the Corps of Engineers built a series of canals and gateways that allowed the graduation of the entrance of fresh water or salt water from the river or the sea, and they concessioned thousands of hectares with guaranteed saltiness for oyster producers. So now they were able to rebuild their industry, and they have a strong oyster industry of high quality products that creates jobs in the region. So they were the managers of a waterway that became a development agency. So in IDB, we want to accompany Latin America in projects such as this one that I've described. Apart from the maintenance and the drafting of canals, we can have a positive impact on the region where these waterways are running. So we want to thank the committee for opening up their doors, and our OLADE colleagues that help us in different energy issues in Latin America, but we have also worked together in the study, which is a transportation study, but also is related to energy sources and climate change, and it will help the development of this big basin in Latin America. Thank you, Agustin, for your final remarks. Very inspiring. And with this, we have concluded the first session. We thank the representatives from the different countries, panelists, moderators, and of course the audience for being with us today. On Thursday, we will have the second session, and you will be able to connect through the same channel. And we also have a chat room for the questions. Thank you very much. We hope you join us next Thursday.